Association of Foreign Correspondents. I'm here with Stephanie Fillion. Thank you so much for joining us at AFC today.
Hi, Dana. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And just to kind of jump right in, I really want to, I've seen a lot of your work has been specifically covering the politics of the UN and a lot of human rights stories. So I just kind of want to get a peek of like what started your interest with human rights and covering the United Nations.
Sure. So, as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a reporter, and I've always been fascinated by international affairs. So, when I was admitted to Columbia Journalism School, it was either I was going to Columbia, which was my first choice, or I was going to do a master in human rights, just because, human rights is such an important part of international politics and international affairs. And I feel like it really goes back to the real mission of, what we're doing as journalists, which is really to sort of give a voice to the voiceless. So when I was at Columbia, I took some classes at SIPA, the School of International Affairs, and some classes in the law school as well to really specialize in human rights. But interestingly enough, I was in New York City, and Columbia has great relationship with the UN. There's a lot of students there, but I never really thought in terms of journalism that I could cover the UN. And it only happened a few years after when I saw an ad by a specialized media called Pass Blue that they were looking for reporters. And I saw this ad and I was like, oh, that sounds like something that I would love to do. So I started writing for them, and then I did really enjoy it. And, slowly, I, knew more people there, understood the place more, and I really found out that, it really is what I want to do, and it is such a fascinating organization. And human rights specifically, it really is an important part of sort of everybody's life. When we think about human rights, we often think about conflict zones and everything, but there are human rights violations in Canada, and people in power need to be checked anywhere we are.
Exactly. Thank you. And then I've noticed that a lot of your reporting has been freelance with various widely known publications. That's really great. Can you kind of walk us how you would get your foot in the door at like Vice or The Guardian or Pass Blue as a freelance reporter?
Yeah, sure. So I would say it's a lot of tenacity and a lot of hard work. I don't think there's any secret to getting your stories published other than, trying very hard and not sort of giving up, because, I think the number one rules for freelancers is that a lot of your emails are going to get ignored, and, you're going to be ghosted by many editors. And sometimes it's just a matter of, not having the right story to the right media. So, I think it's important to be persistent and, not to take it personally when you get ignored. But I think it's also important to do your research. So, whenever you pitch to an outlet, but also specifically to an editor, you need to know who you're writing to. And, I think it's always good to have personalized emails, telling the editors, I've read some of your stories and I love that. And I think that, this story could be interesting for you. And I think that's a good way to go about it. And, one thing that I really learned as well is that one thing that's important is also to find your voice as a reporter. It's one thing to want to write about something, but I think sometimes it can be good to tell the editor, here's why I'm the one who should be writing about this. So if I can give you some example, I write about women in politics for Forbes. And, I think, when I was talking to the editor there, I made it very clear that, I've been in politics, I've been covering politics in Canada and in the US and internationally for a long time now. And, I've interviewed countless of female politicians and ambassadors, and I'm very aware of like their situations, what are the challenges and everything. So that's one thing. And lately, for example, I've been doing a lot of US-Canada coverage, so the US-Canada relationship. And, I've lived all over Canada. I'm from Quebec, so I do have sort of a unique understanding of the country. And, I've not only studied in the US, I've lived here, so I also understand very well the country. So I think it can be good to also, tell people, that this is why I should be writing about it, and this is why my perspective is different, and sort of building sources around that too.
Yeah. And then what do you think are like the benefits or challenges that you face? You talk about how you write a lot about US-Canadian relations right now, and you have lived in the US and you currently live in the US, but you are from Canada. What's kind of a benefit of being a foreign reporter that is from the area that you're focusing on currently?
Well, it is always sort of, important, some benefit when you're writing about a specific topic to be from there. I mean, you can never understand a place enough. Even when, I'm from Canada, you always learn new thing, whenever you're writing a new story. So it's always important to really understand what you're talking about. And it can be good also to be from another place and to write about another country, but I think it's always about doing your research and sort of trying, to think out of the box and really to sort of find your own voice.
Definitely. And then can you kind of walk us through the like pitching, reporting, and writing process as a freelance reporter? If you want to do it with the story about women in politics through Forbes, that would be like really awesome.
Yeah, sure. So it's hard to walk through a process because the process is always different.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have people reaching out to you that are like, hey, I saw your article and I think would be a good fit. And, sometimes I'll look at the email, I'm not going to be interested. And sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I want to write about this. So, sometimes that's what happens. Or for example, I cover the OECD Secretary General race. So I interviewed the female candidates for that. So, I just had to sort of reach out to the people that were running and, I asked them for the interviews and they were all very open to talk to me. And I think, that's something that with COVID that sort of helped sort of doing this type of work because, these people are extremely busy politicians. And even though they're running campaigns, they want to talk to you. It was before maybe not as easy maybe in people's mind to say, hey, I want to interview this woman in Sweden, hey, I want to interview this woman in Greece. Well, now it's just like, yeah, sure, we're all working remotely anyway, so whether I'm in New York or anywhere else, it doesn't really make a difference. So I feel like that's one good side of doing this. And in terms of then the reporting, it's always sort of doing your research, talking to experts, doing an interview with experts. That's very important. And one part of my work, I often write about very high level politics. So one thing that I find very helpful is whenever I write about maybe a country I don't know that well or a politician that's representing a country that I know about, but I'm not an expert on. I try to ask friends that I know from there, or at least people that I know are from there, just so I have an idea from ordinary people of, what they think about that person. And then, of course, I'm not going to use this 100%, but it just gives me some perspectives on how this person is perceived. Just to give you an example, I recently interviewed the Justice Minister of Cyprus, and she's a very interesting person, but she's also sort of controversial on the island. And I don't think that without talking to a lot of people before doing this interview, I wouldn't have been able to do a piece that was balanced. And so I think it's very helpful to do this mix of like just regular people and also experts.
Yeah, exactly. And then kind of building off how you described reporting with COVID, how do you think COVID-19 has impacted sort of contacting sources and maintaining those relationships?
I think it really depends on how people have adapted themselves to COVID. It's definitely sort of all online and, contacting people as the first step has very often been for me to just email somebody, so it doesn't really change. I do find that a lot more of my reporting, especially at the UN, has been via WhatsApp and, really moved online on Zoom calls and everything. So, that's what it is for most journalists, but it's definitely more important to sort of be able to have all these apps. I use WhatsApp mostly, but I know more people are on Signal and Telegram, so and Messenger. So I just find myself having a lot of different applications, and you just need to navigate through these new technologies, and just being aware of it. And whenever I can, trying to also see people in person outside in New York City, because it's just so good. There's nothing like meeting somebody in person.
Yeah, it's definitely a feeling that I miss. So yeah. And so you've kind of really gone into covering the politics at the UN, which is amazing. I really admire that in a lot of your work. How is it kind of challenging, just like a day covering politics in the UN? Like, if it ever gets daunting, how do you kind of find your center and keep going?
Yeah, so I would say that people often talk are very critical of the UN, and it is challenging to cover the UN. But to me, it's really been a place of opportunities as a journalist because it is such a big organization. There are so
Mhm.
many employees, diplomats, civil society organizations dealing with the UN on a daily basis, and there are a lot of reporters there, but there aren't that many of them if we look at the size of the organization. And a lot of the reporters there don't cover exclusively the UN. So I really found that, a lot of reporters, we really only have time to scratch the surface of what's happening because there's so much happening in a single day at the UN. So, I've been writing for a Pass Blue publication that's really specialized on the United Nations. And I
Mhm.
found that, having this opportunity to go beyond sort of the breaking news and, really dig stories there are so many stories that, can be reported on the UN. So to me, it's really been a place of opportunities. But in terms of challenges, I would say there are two of them mainly. The first one is for sure the interest. So it is hard to get editors interested. I feel like as soon as they see the name United Nations, they sort of lose interest.
Mhm.
So it's hard to sort of, find a way to talk about the UN without really talking about, this big organization that's like remote in New York City. So you really need to sort of find a story without talking directly about it. And on a similar line, I would say that in terms of understanding the working of the organization, so the rules and procedures and everything, it is a challenge because it is complicated how the UN works, and it does take a while to understand it and to understand the dynamics between the countries, and just to understand how to reach out to people and get to know diplomats. There are 193 countries there. There are so
Mhm.
many diplomats, so just building a network of contact there really takes time. But I'm a social person, and I love sort of, and everybody at the UN are fascinating. So it's, as a journalist, it's a really motivating job, I would say.
No, that sounds amazing. I definitely don't always see people who cover like the UN exclusively, and I thought that it was really interesting that a lot of your stories are like really in-depth coverage of that, and I can definitely see like that you've been able to like kind of go in and maintain those relationships. And then what do you think would be like your proudest moment or like your favorite story that you've written as a reporter?
There are many of them. I would say
Mhm.
lately one story that I just thought was fascinating was so Switzerland is running for a seat on the Security Council, and there are a lot of people back home that are worried that Switzerland, as a neutral country, wouldn't be able to appear neutral anymore internationally. And
Mhm.
Switzerland has had very unique roles in sort of negotiations as a mediator internationally. So there's sort of this trade-off between, well, we're a member of the international community, so we want to see it on the Security Council, but also, we have this unique reputation as a neutral country. So sort of this discussion was to me very interesting. So I decided to interview, the Swiss ambassador, talk to people in
Mhm.
Switzerland, and write a piece about it. But also to try, started my piece by, talking about chocolate and cheese, just because, when you talk about issues that are so deeply political, you also want to lighten things up a
Mhm.
little bit
Yeah.
and sort of making relatable to people.
Mhm.
And also, other stories that, I'm proud of, the coverage that I've been doing on the Secretary General selection process this year. So a
Mhm.
lot of people thought that because Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the UN, is running for another term, a lot of people were just sort of expecting him to be elected for a second term very easily, and not really to have
Mhm.
anybody running against them, because as the incumbent, it can sort of be negative for a country to say, I want to, to send a candidate to run against them, because it sort of means I'm not happy with you.
Mhm.
But early on in January or February, I found out that a UN employee has decided to launch her own race against Guterres, and she's 34 years old. She's Canadian. So a lot of reporters were
Mhm.
sort of skeptical when they saw that, including myself, so didn't really
Mhm.
give her attention. But I decided to talk with her and to meet with her, and I thought she had something to say. She had a message to send. And even though a lot of people running for this job usually are very experienced politicians or diplomats, even though she doesn't have this type of experience, she can still bring something to the debate. So I was the first one to report on that, and then like the New York Times wrote about it after that, and a lot of other very big publications. So I was sort of happy to be able to start this discussion, because it could have been pretty much a race that nobody really talked about. And following that, there's been sort of more discussion about the process and everything, and sort of forced also the Secretary General to just talk about it.
Yeah, no, that must be a great feeling to kind of come in first when reporting on that story and to see all these other like major organizations kind of fall in line behind your work. That's definitely amazing.
Yeah, and it comes back to the point of sort of freelancing and grabbing the opportunities. I think ultimately having sort of the chance to write to media that's specialized and that's always interested in you
Mhm.
and stories, gives you this opportunity that maybe mainstream media wouldn't necessarily have given like that platform to this topic, because it is so specialized on the UN. It is so
Mhm.
specific that very often people can really relate to these issues. So being able to sort of first talk about it, and being able to sort of, frame what her race is about and what's her message, maybe
Mhm.
allowed other people to get interested in her story. So it was positive for me to have this platform to write about it.
Yeah, definitely. And you talk about how a lot of like specializing in the UN, there's not always like the interest there, or that it's like a really heavy kind of intricate organization that people can kind of get lost in. How do you kind of maintain this work that draws the attention of a reader that might really not know that much about the UN and not know how to start?
So I think it's really about talking about the UN without really making people feel like you're talking about the UN,
Hmm.
and finding stories that people can relate to. So, for example, there was a coup in Myanmar 2 months ago, and it's a very heavy story. It's hard to talk about, but the permanent representative of Myanmar has decided, sort of to go against what was going on, and that it would stay ambassador, and that it would speak up against what's going on in this country. And it's very brave, because he probably has relatives in Myanmar, and there's violence going on in the country. So I think that like finding people like him maybe to talk about this issue
Hmm.
can make it more interesting and more relatable to people, because hey, here's this diplomat, is really putting sort of his life and his reputation at stake here, because he thinks that democracy is so important in his country.
Hmm.
So it is part of it. And also I must say that trying to find a publication that has the audience to talk about the UN can be a good way to go about it. So, for example, as I said, PASPU, but also foreign policy,
Hmm.
you will see that, if I can pitch sometimes stories about the UN, they have an audience that's maybe more interested than other mainstream media. So going about publications that are, more specialized maybe
Hmm.
can be a good way to go about it.
Yeah, definitely. And then, do you have any advice to young journalists who are trying to study to be foreign correspondents abroad, or to cover any like very like specific niche kind of fields of expertise that you've kind of landed with the UN?
Yeah, so I would say to really specialize in something, I think freelancing can be a good way to start, because, when you start at a big media outlet, which is, what I did, you don't really get to assign the stories you cover. You often get assigned to
Hmm.
them. So, if you really are adamant that, you want to write about something, you can try to really, work somewhere and build your portfolio on the side while freelancing. But I think my main advice would really to be patient. I think, I'm a millennial and I've been working with people that, are even younger than me. And I think that what we all have in common is that we're very impatient, and because we have a degree, a master's degree, or an undergraduate degree, we think that we should get the job that we want right away. And the reality is that it's not what's going to happen. And we all like to start by writing this 3,000 word piece in the New Yorker about international affairs. But I think in general, you can make mistakes if you start by doing that. I think there's value in all the small steps of the process, starting by fact checking, by getting really good at interviewing people, writing breaking news. So I think all those steps are extremely important. And I think like younger people, including myself, we want to skip them and, be a Paris correspondent for the New York Times right away. But I think there's value in really learning through every step of the process.
Yeah, well said. And is there anything else that you want us here at AFC to know about your work, you as a journalist, or anything that's coming up for you?
Well, I'm going to be on a panel tomorrow about the Secretary General elections, and also next week, hosted by Columbia Journalism, about distance diplomacy. So, if anybody's interested in one of those issues, I encourage them to tune in.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It was really great to get to sit down and talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Of course. Have a great rest of your day.